So yeah, welcome to the Carter Banks Hour. Come on in. My name's Carter Banks. This is Cancer Ward, written by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, read to you by Carter Banks. Chapter 32, let's get into it. Mend a few things here. Make sure both my mics are picking up, so it can be in stereo left and right. Just kidding, audio joke. Total joke. I would never do it like that. Okay, here we go. Chapter 32, The Other Side of the Coin. Dontsova had never imagined that something she knew inside and out, and so thoroughly, could change to the point where it became entirely new and unfamiliar. For 30 years, she had been dealing with other people's illnesses, and for a good 20, she had sat in front of the X-ray screen. She had read the screen, read the film, read the distorted, imploring eyes of her patients. She had compared what she saw with books and analyses, written articles, and argued with colleagues and patients. During this time, what she had worked out empirically for herself had become more and more indisputable, while in her mind, medical theory grew increasingly coherent. Etiology, pathogenesis, symptoms, diagnosis, the course of the disease, treatment, prevention, prognosis, all these were real enough. The doctor might have sympathy with the patient's resistance, doubts, and fears. These were understandable human weaknesses, but they didn't count for anything when it came to deciding which method should be used. There was no place left for such feelings in the squares of logic. Until now, all human bodies had been built identically, as described in the standard anatomy text. The physiology of the vital processes and the physiology of sensations were uniform as well. Everything that was normal or deviated from the norm was explained in logical terms by authoritative manuals. And suddenly, within a few days, her own body had fallen out of this great orderly system. It had struck the hard earth and was now like a helpless sack crammed with organs which might at any moment be seized with pain, cry out. That's right, actually, since the last chapter that we'd read, Dontsova, I think, actually has breast cancer or something like that, which sucks. Within a few days, everything had been turned inside out. Her body was, as before, composed of parts she well knew. The whole was unknown and frightening. When her son had been small, they used to look at pictures together. Ordinary household objects, a tea kettle, a spoon, or a chair, were unrecognizable to him if drawn from an unusual angle. The course of her disease and her new place in the system of treatment had now become equally unrecognizable to her. As from today, she had ceased to be a rational guiding force in the treatment. She had become an unreasoning, resistant lump of matter. The moment she admitted the disease existed, she was crushed by it, like a frog underfoot. Adjusting to the disease was at first unbearable. Her world had capsized. The entire arrangement of her existence was disrupted. It was not yet dead, and yet she had to give up her husband, her son, her daughter, her grandson, and her medical work as well, even though it was at her own work, medicine, that would now be rolling over her and through her like a noisy train. In a single day, she had to give up everything and suffer a pale green shadow, not knowing for a long time whether she was to die irrevocably or return to life. It had once occurred to her that there was a lack of color, joy, festivity in her life. It was all work and worry, work and worry. But how wonderful the old life seemed now. Parting with it was so unthinkable it made her scream. Already the whole of this Sunday had been unlike any other Sunday. It had consisted of a preparation of her intestines for the next day's X-ray. On Monday, at 9:15, as agreed, Dormaront Tikunovich, Vera Gangart, and another intern turned off the lights in the X-ray room and began to adapt themselves to the dark. Ludmila Afansyevna undressed and went behind the screen. An orderly handed her the first glass of barium meal. As she took it, she spilled some. The hand that held the glass was quite used to pressing and kneading patients' stomachs in this very room, clad in a rubber glove, but today it was shaking. They went through the familiar routine, feeling her, pressing her, turning her around, making her raise her arms and breathe in. Then they lowered the camera, placed her on the table, and photographed her from various angles. They had to allow time for the contrast mass to spread into the digestive tract. Of course, the X-ray apparatus wasn't allowed to stand idle. Meanwhile, the intern was letting her regular patients through. Ludmila Afansyevna even sat down and tried to help a few times, but her mind wouldn't concentrate, and she wasn't much use. Again, the time came for her to go behind the screen, to drink the barium, lie down, and be photographed. It was an examination like any other, only it didn't take place in the usual businesslike silence, interrupted by brief commands from the doctors, Oroshenkov kept up a humorous banter with his young assistants, making jokes at their expense. At Ludmila Afansyevna's and at his own, he told them how, as a student, he had been ejected for bad behavior from the Moscow Arts Theater just after it came into existence. It was a premiere of the Power of Darkness. Asterisk next to Power of Darkness says Tolstoy's drama about peasant life. It was a premiere of the Power of Darkness. Akim was blowing his nose and undoing the puttees so realistically that Dormaront and the friend he was with began to hiss. After that occasion, he said, every time he went to Moscow, the Moscow Arts Theater, he was afraid he might be recognized and thrown out again. They were all trying to talk as much as possible to relieve the painful pauses between the moments of silent examination. Dontsova could tell, though, that Gangart's throat was dry, and that it was an effort for her to speak. She knew her well enough to be sure about that. But of course, this was the way Ludmila Afansyevna wanted it. She drank the barium meal, wiped her mouth, and reaffirmed, "No, the patient shouldn't know everything. I always thought so, and I still do. When the time comes for discussion, I shall leave the room." They accepted this arrangement each time the doctors wanted to talk. Ludmila Afansyevna went out and tried to find herself some work with the X-ray lab, assistants, or with the case histories. There was plenty to be done, but today she found she could not complete anything. Every time they called her in, she went with pounding heart, hoping that they would greet her with good news, that Veroshka Gangart would throw her arms around her with relief and congratulate her. But it didn't happen. There were only more instructions, more twists and turns under the camera, more examinations. As Ludmila Afansyevna obeyed each new order, she couldn't help pondering and trying to explain it. "I can't see what you're looking for. I can tell from your methods." She let the word slip out. After she saw it, they suspected a tumor, not of the stomach or the duodenum, but of the esophagus. This was the most difficult type of all, because the operation required partial opening of the chest cavity. Come on, Ludoshka, Oroshenkov boomed through the darkness. First you want an early diagnosis, and now you say you don't like our methods. Would you rather wait 3 months or more? Then we'll tell you the result outright. No, thank you, I can do without a 3 months wait. She refused, too, to look at the large, most important X-ray which they had received from the laboratory by the end of the day. She had dropped her decisive, masculine gestures and was sitting there limply on a chair under the bright overhead lamp, waiting for Oroshenkov's concluding words. For his words and his decision, not for his diagnosis. Well then, my respected colleague, Oroshenkov drawled the words out benevolently. The celebrities are divided in their opinion. As he said this, his eyes kept watch from under his angular eyebrows. They saw how confused she was. One might have expected the resolute, unyielding Dontsova to show more strength in such a trial. Her sudden collapse confirmed Oroshenkov's opinion that modern man is helpless when confronted with death, that he has no weapon to meet it with. Which of you is it who thinks the worst? Asked Dontsova, making an effort to smile. I hope it's not him. Oroshenkov spread the fingers of one hand to show his doubt. Your daughters are the ones who believe the worst, he said. See how you've brought them up. I take a more cheerful view. The corner of his lips curved slightly, a sign of good humor and benevolence. Gangart sat there, pale as a ghost, as though her fate was being decided. I see, thank you, Dontsova felt a little better. So, now what? How many times had patients sat there waiting for her to announce her decision after a similar moment of respite? Invariably, the decision was based on science and statistics, a conclusion cross-checked and attained by logic. What a cask of horrors, she now thought. Lies concealed in this moment of respite. Well, Ludoshka, Oroshenkov rumbled on soothingly. It's an unjust world, you know. If you weren't one of us, we'd be turning you right over to the surgeons with an alternative diagnosis. They would hack away at you a bit and slice something out in the process. You know what miserable creatures they are. They can't open up an abdomen without taking out a souvenir. They'd cut you open, and then it would transpire which of us was right. But you are one of us, after all, and we have our friends Larosha and Serezho in the Radiology Institute in Moscow. So, what we've decided is this. We want you to go there, all right? They'll read what we write about you and give you a look over. We'll have more opinions to go by. Also, if there has to be an operation, they'll do it better there. In fact, everything can be done better there. Isn't that so? He had said, if there has to be an operation. Was he trying to say it mightn't be necessary? Or perhaps he meant that, no, it must be worse than that. You mean, Dontsova hazarded, that the operation's so complicated you daren't do it here? Oh, no, of course not, replied Oroshenkov, frowning and raising his voice a little. You mustn't look for hidden meaning behind what I said. It's just that we're arranging a little, what's the word? A little extra pull for you. If you don't believe us. He nodded toward the table. Take the film and look for yourself. It was simple, wasn't it? All she had to do was reach out for it and make her own analysis. No, no, said Dontsova, drawing an imaginary line between herself and the X-ray plate. I don't want to. And so the decision was taken. They talked to the senior doctor, then Dontsova went to the Republic's Ministry of Health. Strangely enough, there was no delay there. They gave her a leave pass and an admission chit to the Moscow clinic. It was suddenly apparent that there was no reason whatever to keep her in the town where she had worked these past 20 years. Dontsova had known what she was doing when she had concealed her pain from everyone. You only had to tell one person, and irresistibly the avalanche was set in motion. Nothing depended on you anymore. Her ties in life, which had seemed so strong and permanent, were loosening and breaking, all in a space of hours rather than days. In the clinic and at her home, she was unique and irreplaceable. Now she was being replaced. We are so attached to Earth, and yet we are incapable of holding on to it. There was no point in further delay. On Wednesday, that same week, she went on her last rounds of the wards with Gangart. She was transferring the administration of the radiology department to her. It's got to be nuts being like a doctor, specifically in a cancer ward, and then you find out that you have cancer, but you don't actually want to know because you know exactly what happens to people that have cancer because you've treated them. That just sucks. I totally understand why she would opt to not know anything. I wouldn't want to either. Then again, I don't know. The rounds began in the morning and continued almost until lunchtime. Dontsova relied on Veroshka Gangart, who was familiar with the cases of all her inpatients. Yet as she began to walk past their beds, knowing it would be at least a month before she returned to them, if she ever did. For the first time, for days, she felt lucid and a little stronger. She regained her interest in work and her ability to reason. In the morning, she had intended to go through her affairs and sign the last necessary papers as quickly as possible, then go home and prepare for the journey. But the plan had gone by the board. She was so used to taking personal charge of everything that even today, she couldn't leave a single patient without making at least a month's mental forecast. She had to foresee the course of the disease and what treatment and emergency measures might become necessary. She walked through the wards almost exactly as usual. It gave her the first hours of relief she had in the whirl of the last few days. She was getting acclimatized to her misfortune, yet as she passed through the wards, she felt as if she had been deprived of her rights as a doctor, as if she had been disqualified because of some unforgivable act, fortunately not yet announced to the patients. She examined, prescribed, and issued instructions, gazing at each patient like a false prophet, while all the time there was a chill running down her spine. She no longer had the authority to pass verdicts of life and death upon others. In a few days' time, she would be lying in a hospital bed, as helpless and as dumb as they were, neglecting her appearance, awaiting the pronouncements of her more experienced seniors, afraid of the pain, perhaps regretting that she had entered that particular clinic at all. She might even come to doubt whether they were giving her the right treatment, and long to get rid of her hospital pajamas and go home in the evening, as most people do, as though this were the greatest happiness in the world. These were the thoughts that plagued her, and weakened her normal, resolute cast of mind. Meanwhile, Vera Kornelievna was taking on a joyless burden she did not want at this price. In fact, she didn't want it at all. They called her Mother, and for Vera, this was no empty word. She had produced the worst diagnosis of the three doctors. She expected Ludmila Afansievna to have to undergo an exhausting operation, which she might not survive, undermined as she was by chronic radiation sickness. As she walked through the ward beside her, it occurred to her that this might well be the last time that she might spend many more years walking daily between these beds, recalling with a pang of sorrow the woman who had made a doctor of her. Unobtrusively, she lifted a finger and brushed aside a tear. But today of all days, Vera's prognoses had to be accurate, as never before. She couldn't miss asking a single important question, because henceforward, for the first time these 50 or so lives would be her responsibility entirely. There would be no one to turn to or to ask advice from. And so, upset and worried, the doctors carried on their rounds for half the day. First they went through the women's wards. Then they visited the patients whose beds were out on the landing or in the corridor. Naturally enough, they lingered beside Sibgatov. They had given so much of themselves to try to save this quiet Tartar, yet all they had won was a few months' delay. And what miserable months! A pitiful existence in a unlit, unventilated corner of the landing. His sacrum could no longer support him. He could only hold himself upright by pressing against his back with his two strong arms. His only exercise was a walk into the next door ward, where he would sit and listen to the conversation. His only air was what reached him from the distant window. His only sky was the ceiling. But even this miserable life, consisting of nothing but medical treatments, orderlies' quarrels, hospital food, and games of dominoes, even life with that gaping wound in his back, was good enough for his pain-racked eyes to light up with gratitude every time the doctors came on their rounds. It made Dontsova realize that if she rejected her own yardstick and adopted Sibgatov's, she could still count herself lucky. Somehow Sibgatov had already heard that it was Ludmila Afanasyeva's last day. They peered at each other in silence, defeated but staunch allies, knowing that the conqueror's lash was soon to drive them to different corners of the earth.